In your 60 years of investing, what are some of the key insights and lessons that you've gained from that time?
You only need two things to be a successful investor: common sense and patience. And patience is the most important. And this is what most people sadly don't have. You make serious money by buying into a growing company and staying with it. As the company grows, your investment grows.
So you became the UK's first ISA millionaire in 2003. You contributed 126,200. When I crunched the numbers, that's actually roughly £657 per month. A lot of people, when it comes to investing, they think they need to put in thousands, 1.5.
There's nothing too small to start investing. You don't need a large sum of money. When I started off, I was just putting, £80 into a company or £100, in some cases £50, because that's all I could afford in those days. I believe you create financial independence by building up brick by brick.
Your average annual return was 21%. That's beating the market. What was the approach that helped you consistently achieve those above average returns?
You're not defined by where you come from.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big message that I always want to tell people. Like
you have to be able to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
When you grow up in ends, you don't realize it when you're confident, but you have an audacity to do things that ordinarily most people wouldn't be willing to do.
Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Atto. We have a very special guest in the building. We have Lord John Lee, who has been a member of the House of Lords since 2006. He was an MP between 1979 and 1992, and he has been investing in the stock market for 60 years. He's the author of the book How to Make a Million Slowly, Guiding Principles from a Lifetime of Investing. He's written for the Financial Times for over 20 years. He's a patron of Share Shock, which represents Individual Shareholders Society in the UK, and is a podcast host of the Investors Chronicle. John, how are you doing today?
Fine, thank you. Very comfortable and looking forward to our discussion.
Yes, me too. I'm looking forward to this. Many people might not know this, right? But how I kind of found you was that I found out that you was the UK's first ISA millionaire. And I actually didn't know that we had many people who had built their stocks and shares ISA to that, £1 million, because it's not really widely publicized. And one of the things that, one of the comments I always get on the podcast is, that, oh, can you actually build? I've seen comments. I've never seen anybody.
Well, I think now they're about, the last figure I saw was about 4,000 ISA millionaires now. But I declared my valuation of £1 million, excuse me, in 2003, and I think I was the first to reach the million with my PEPs stroke ISA, because PEPs were the precursor to ISAs. And no one challenged that, as it were. So it's a tag that I have and live with.
Yeah. And look, it's going to be very inspirational and informational for people, especially, like I said, I get comments where people say, I've never seen, show me proof of somebody doing this. Okay, well, people, we wanted the proof. We've got somebody on the podcast as the proof. So, I introduce a part of you. Who would you say John is?
Sorry?
Who would you say John is?
Who would I?
Who is John?
Who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I?
People always get thrown by that question.
Right. Who am I?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose there've been three main strands in my life: family, and the stock market, and politics. And obviously, there've been a number of related activities and branches of all those. Yeah. But those have been the three sort of central cores or spines in my life. Yeah. So originally I was at school in Manchester. My father was a doctor. Okay. I left school at 16 and went into an accountant's office at £4 a week. And scraped through my exams, so I qualified as a chartered accountant when I was 21, 22. And then I had a spell 2 years with a stockbroking firm in Manchester. And then I set up a company that specialized in amalgamations and mergers, which developed into a small investment banking group. And I sold out of that. And then very much focused on politics, which had always been a mainline interest. And I fought my first election in October 1974 in Moss Side, Manchester, as a Conservative candidate, and didn't win. And then I was selected as candidate for, it was a seat called Nelson and Cone up in Lancashire, the old textile belt of Lancashire. And so I was adopted, I think, in 1975 as the Conservative candidate. And I won the election in 1979. I defeated Doug Hoyle, Lord Hoyle, who's just died, who was the father of Lindsay Hoyle, who was a speaker in the House of Commons at the moment. So I was MP for Nelson and Cone, and then it became Pendle from 79 to 92. So I was in the House of Commons as a Conservative MP for 13 years. And then during those years, I had 6 ministerial years, 3 years as a defence minister, and 3 years as an employment minister with the tourism portfolio. And then I lost my seat in 1992. And then I did a mix of things in the Manchester area. I was chairman of the Christie Hospital NHS Trust, which was the big cancer centre in the Northwest for many years. I was chairman of the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester for a number of years. I was High Sheriff of Greater Manchester for a number of years, and 1 or 2 business involvements as well. And during that period, I waved farewell to the Conservative Party when, in my judgment, it moved very much to the right, became, in my judgment, again, uncaring, and it became increasingly anti-European. And I'm a very strong supporter of our membership of Europe. And I was a Remainer. And I think it's a great tragedy that that we've had Brexit. And in fact, I always felt at the time that young people should have had 2 votes in the referendum on whether we remain in Europe or not, because essentially it was their future that we were voting on. So I think it would have been a good idea if older folk like me just had 1 vote, but young people had 2 votes. And then I'm sure would have stayed in Europe.
Fair. That's very interesting. That is very, we could definitely talk all day about that.
And so I waved the Conservative Party, Tory Party farewell, and 2 or 3 years later joined the Liberal Democrats, and Charles Kennedy, who was then the Lib Dem leader, offered me a peerage in 2005, 2006. And so I've been a member of the House of Lords as a Liberal Democrat peer for 17 odd years now. So in total, 13 years in the Commons, 17 in the Lords, about 30 years at Westminster.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. I think we have an understanding of where it kind of started and how you kind of got into it and the different areas, and potentially as well, like how, the finance background, the fact that you was like an accountant. So I read that you made your first investment in 1958, right? What inspired you to begin investing in the stock market at that time, and what did you invest in?
Okay. Well, I think I've always been, from a very young age, a saver. And I remember when I was, 8, 9, 10, any pocket money I got or similar or presents, I would go across the road to the local newsagents and buy some saving stamps and try to fill a book. So I've really been a saver from a very early age. But as far as the stock market is concerned, I think I know that I inherited that interest from my father, who I mentioned was a doctor, and with his modest savings and as a hobby, he started to invest in the stock market, and he used to read the two magazines that were then published, one called the Stock Exchange Gazette and the other called the Investors Chronicle. The Investors Chronicle is still going today, and I do a podcast with them monthly, which you mentioned. That's called Lee and the IC, if I may mention it. So I used to remember him sitting with a pipe, cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by these piles of magazines, and I used to pull his leg about these magazines and this interest in the stock market. And then I thought, well, I'll delve a little bit into this myself. And so I started to take an interest. And as you rightly say, I bought my first share with my savings, very limited savings in those days. I think I'd say £45. And for some reason, I invested in a company called Aviation and Shipping, who owned one ship. And unfortunately, the ship, I'm afraid, went down to the bottom of the ocean, and my £45 went with it. Okay. So it wasn't the most auspicious of starts, but hopefully things have improved a little over the years.
Interesting. Okay, so the first was a shipping company, and obviously that kind of failed. I guess, where did you kind of go from there? Did that kind of not scare you and be like, you know what, I'm not?
Well, I mean, I wasn't best pleased with that, but you know, I nevertheless had or was taking an increasing interest in the stock market, and started to look at other companies. And I look back in my old investment ledgers, and some of the investments I made in my early years were for £100 or £50, sort of very small amounts in those days. And obviously, as I earned a little bit more post-qualifying as an accountant, I was able to invest a little bit, save a little bit more, and invest a little bit more, and have gradually developed my portfolio and portfolios over the years, particularly my ISA, which, of course, followed on from PEP's personal equity plans, which originally came in 1987.
Yeah. And we'll definitely get to that. I really appreciate you talking about the early days, because I think it's always kind of interesting. What would you say? Of course, the shipping one, I guess you would say that was a mistake. What other kind of early mistakes did you kind of make early on in your investing career?
Well, it's very difficult to say, looking back, what mistakes I made. I think I'd prefer to look back and say what I now realise. And I now realise that you only need two things to be a successful investor. Common sense. I mean, obviously you need some money to invest. That goes without saying, although not as much as people imagine. But there are only two things you need to be a successful investor, in my view: common sense and patience. And patience is the most important.
Okay.
And this is what most people sadly don't have. And so they might buy a share, and it goes up a little, and they see a profit, and they want to take that profit, as it were, and move on to something else. Well, that really isn't the way to make serious money. You make serious money by buying into a growing company, and staying with it, and hopefully, as the company grows, your investment grows. So, to put it simply, looking back, if one had bought shares, say, in Tesco, when you first could buy the shares in Tesco, which I'm guessing maybe 30 years ago, and you'd stayed with those Tesco shares, you'd be quite a wealthy person today. Similarly, if you'd bought shares, say, in Greggs 20 years ago, you would have done very, very well. So being patient once you're invested in a good company is the key. Patience is the key. And of course, the problem is with modern technology. So people can see their shares and share prices on their mobile phone or iPad or whatever it is. In a way, because once they see a little profit, they're tempted to take it. And really, that isn't the way to build a substantial amount of money.
Yeah. And I'm definitely going to ask you more questions about that mindset and patience, because I think it's very, very important. But you're absolutely right. I think there is definitely this element of, if you do see profit, I think there's a bit of a fear that you might lose out on the profit, because if the value of the shares go down, you're like, I could have missed out. And but you just don't know in a few years' time if it goes back up, right? So yeah, there's a few questions that I have around that to understand how you manage to stay patient, because for a lot of us, it's not something that we're able to do. You mentioned common sense as well. How do you mean in terms of common sense?
Well, let me go back to Tesco as an example. 20, 30 years ago, when supermarkets were in their infancy and there were hardly any, I think I'm right in saying hardly any, say 20, 30 years ago, you would then have seen one or two supermarkets, maybe Tesco, maybe one or two of the others, becoming established and attracting customers.
Yeah.
And so you would have, for the first time, a whole range of products under one large roof, whereas before you just had individual shops, as it were, greengrocers or fishmongers or fruiterers or whatever it is. So applying common sense, if you were living 20 or 30 years ago and you see supermarkets, then you think, well, this is a trend. This is something that's going to take off, and the way forward in shopping is, for most people, is going to be in and through supermarkets. Yeah. So if you'd bought shares, as I said, then in Tesco at that stage, you'd have done very well.
Yeah.
Similarly, when Amazon started up and people started shopping online, once you realize that this is something that people are going to be increasingly attracted to, if you had bought Amazon shares when they started, when maybe you first bought your first item on online, you'd have done very, very well investing. Or similarly, if you started to see people with computers or iPads, or mobile phones at the start, you could well see those products really becoming global products. I mean, virtually everyone now has got a computer or an iPad, and certainly they've got a mobile phone. If you'd bought shares in those companies early on, you'd have done very, very well. So you're applying common sense to what you actually see is happening in the real world.
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. I think sometimes we overthink things a little bit too much instead of, like you say, actual change in the world. What is something that is changing currently? So obviously we know AI is something that's a bit more complicated.
Well, to put it more simply, when people used originally to take their holidays in this country years ago, and a few people went abroad. Then we started the package tour industry started. And the majority of people increasingly went abroad for their holidays. So package tours developed, as it were. If, for example, you'd bought shares in Ryanair when they started, it's grown obviously to be a huge airline now and a very profitable one, you'd have done very, very well. So there are always these new trends that are coming along, and you need to apply common sense and see what is happening. What are people doing? How are they spending their leisure time? You try to invest accordingly.
Yeah.
So one realizes that a growing population is going to require increasing medical support and help, and so had you invested years ago in AstraZeneca, for the sake of argument, you'd have done very well indeed.
Yeah.
So you're applying common sense to what you see out there in the real world. And once you're invested in a good company, like Tesco growing or like Amazon growing, then stay with it and hopefully watch your investment grow.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much for explaining that and sharing that with us. Imagine you had an employee who showed up to work daily, but they did absolutely nothing. You wouldn't be happy with that, right? Well, that's what happens when your business funds sit idle in a regular current account. Isn't it time to make money work for you? For us business owners, expenses like rent, taxes, payroll never stop, and they keep going up. Yet so many of us leave our business savings in accounts that earn little to no interest, missing out on potentially hundreds of pounds in passive income that could really help cover those costs. That's why I use Tide's instant savings account, which allows me to passively earn 3.81% AER Variable on my business savings. The best part, I can withdraw funds instantly with no fees, and my business savings is protected with FSCS protection on up to £85,000. We've partnered with Tide for this episode, and they're giving new members a special bonus. When you sign up and use my code SAVVYWALLET you'll get a £100 bonus when you open and fund a Tide Instant Savings account with £5,000 within the first 30 days. Setting up a Tide Instant Savings account is quick and easy with just 4 simple steps. To take advantage of this special offer, tap the link in the episode description and don't forget to use my code SAVVYWALLET to claim your £100 bonus. Boosted offer valid until the 1st of June 2025 for new customers only. Rate correct as of the 6th of February 2025. Visit tide.code/savings for up-to-date rates and key terms during the promotion and afterwards. In terms of like your investment journey again early on, what was like that turning point that helped you become a better investor?
A turning point.
Yeah, to help you become.
Well, I'm not sure that there was one event that that made a big difference, as it were. I suppose the biggest individual event for me was the coming of what were called personal equity plans, PEPs, which to all intents and purposes are the same as ISAs. They were brought in 1987 by Nigel Lawson, who was then the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer. And then later on, years later, Gordon Brown effectively changed the name of PEPs, personal equity plans, to ISAs. And of course, the ISA gives tremendous advantages to people by taking out an ISA, because any capital gain you make within the ISA is free of tax, and any dividends you receive are free of tax as well. So it's a wonderful, to use the phrase, tax-free wrapper. Yeah, and that's wrapper spelt with a W, not RAPPER. And many overseas friends of mine are very envious and jealous because they don't have anything in their country like the ISA here. So every serious investor, should take out an ISA. And I've taken out junior ISAs, which you can do for my grandchildren via their parents, because the grandfather can't do it directly. It's got to be done at the moment ridiculously, in my view, and I want that to change through their parents. So I've taken out junior ISAs for 2 of my grandsons, who were then aged something like 9 and 7. And I've invested some money for them and discussed it with them. And we've invested and bought a small number of shares, obviously, in companies that they can understand and touch, like Tesco, like Greggs, like Hollywood Bowl, like Bloomsbury Publishing, who published the Harry Potter books. So and shares in Tesco and Sainsbury's. So I'm trying to get them to understand that they own a very, very, very small part of those businesses. And so from an early age, I'm trying to educate them, and hopefully some of your listeners in how you should begin to build up and to focus. Anyway, when we're discussing this, my 7-year-old grandson said, Grandpa, he said, I want to buy shares in Standard Chartered, the bank, Standard Chartered, age 7. So I looked at him in amazement and said, well, you know, where does that come from? You know, who's mentioned that to you? And he said, oh, I want to buy shares in Standard Chartered, Grandpa, because they sponsor Liverpool. And he's a big Liverpool supporter.
Okay.
And actually, I'm taking him at the weekend to watch, hopefully, to watch Liverpool and Wolves.
Okay.
Because he's a big Liverpool fan.
Okay.
So you can't start too young.
Yeah. I like that. And this is how you kind of build the generational wealth by, you know, having these conversations young. The fact that a 7-year-old could say to you, I don't think I've like, you know, that is such an interesting story, because it's like they have that interest from young. So when they're even getting older, they're going to start investing themselves from early.
So going back, I was lucky in that my father took an interest in the stock market for his small savings, and he used to buy shares, and it's through him that I developed an interest.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know, if your parents own shares in different companies or one or two companies, then, you know, it's easier to pass that knowledge and to generate an interest in through your children and maybe grandchildren.
Yeah, and I think it's an important conversation to have. Definitely important to have it within the family, because, you know, it's not just the money you pass down, like you say, it's the knowledge as well. So as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, so you became the UK's first ISA millionaire in 2003. Can you share?
But I've been investing, yes. Well,
before, yeah.
When you know, to repeat, when PEPs before ISAs came out in 1987, I think you could put £2,000, £2,400 a year into a PEP at the start. And I bought shares in a company called PIFCO, which is a Manchester-based wholesale and manufacturer of electrical products. Then in the following years, I also bought more shares in PIFCO because it was an established company. It was profitable. It had cash in the bank, not heavy borrowings. It was paying a good dividend. You know, I thought this was a good, solid investment. And some years later, it was taken over by Sultan of the USA.
Okay.
Within my ISA, you know, I made quite a nice profit. So for the first 15 years, from 1987 to 2003, 15, 16 years, I managed to put the maximum amount that one could each year into an ISA and invested, and also then reinvested the dividends instead of taking money out. The dividends on the shares that were in the ISA, I reinvested, I kept the money, kept the dividends in the ISA, and so the whole thing compounded. And the additional cash that came in through dividends or the occasional takeover, then I reinvested. And over what was it, 15 years, built up this ISA portfolio to the extent it was worth about £1 million in 2003.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those details. And I'm going to clarify people a few things. So like you said, although you started investing earlier, prior to 1987, correct me if I'm wrong, there was no like tax-free ISAs it was called PEPs, right? There was no way. So
you had to pay capital gains tax.
Exactly, you had to pay capital gains. So when PEP, as you mentioned, came in 1987, you took advantage of that. It's not what we have today. It's not the 20,000 limit. So I just want to make that clear to people, because I've got the numbers of how much John did over the 16 years, how much he contributed. But it's not how much it is today. It's not 20,000. Of course, it's equivalent to, you know,
sure. You have to
average income and stuff like inflation.
Yeah.
And then I think when it got into, I've got a note here, when it got into the between 1999 and 2003, the allowance, stocks and shares ISA allowance was about 7,000. So again, much lower than what it is today, which is 20,000. So over the 16 years, you contributed. People are going to be very surprised to know how much you contributed. It's a shocker. So you contributed 126,200. Now that on the face of it, that sounds big, but actually when I crunched the numbers, that's actually only roughly £657 per month,
right,
over 16 years, right? Obviously, I know there might, again, I know it increased over time, 2,000 some years, 7 years, but even just that, I think it makes it more achievable for people. Firstly, is that kind of roughly kind of correct? That it was 126,000. That makes it very achievable for people, because a lot of people, when it comes to investing, they think they need to put in thousands, 1,500, 2,000, because obviously we use calculators to kind of do
the important
that.
thing is to try and put some savings in, steadily each year, as it were, and obviously. The majority of people can't put in the maximum, so one's got to be sensible and just put in what one can. But hopefully, if you invest in growing companies and reinvest the dividends, in other words, keep the dividends that you receive within your ISA. You're invested in more companies that are successful than unsuccessful, and we all make mistakes. Hopefully, you will steadily build up. And I think today that we have something like, 4,000 or 5,000, several thousand people who are ISA millionaires.
Yeah, about 4,800. Yeah, so it's still a small amount, really.
Still quite small. Yes.
Yeah, compared to like obviously the population in the UK. And what's so interesting, again, I just want to just really hammer it home, is like it shows that you can start small, start with what you have, make sure that you're investing smart, make sure that you're doing it consistently, and then over time you're able to build that pot. Because again, if you said to somebody, actually, if you put in 700, 800 a month, you're able to do that consistently over 16 years, you're able to build a portfolio of over $1 million. A lot of people will say, oh, yeah, I'll take that.
Sure.
But people don't want to do the hard work or do the patient thing and start. They're always thinking, okay, I need to have a lot of money to do it. And that demystifies it.
And I think
really.
the sad thing today, Atto, is that I think it's accepted that more young people speculate in cryptocurrency than invest in traditional forms. And this really is very worrying. And in fact, I get very cross when I read articles and in the article it talks about people investing in cryptocurrency. People don't invest in cryptocurrency; they speculate in cryptocurrency. I mean, to me, it's like gambling. People gamble on the horses or whatever it is. It's not investing, many people, of course, have made money out of speculating in crypto, and if they want to do it, that's fine. But I think I'd advise them, if they have made quite a bit of money, to wave farewell to crypto, or at least sell a proportion and invest in one or two more traditional businesses, which I think over time will stand them in good stead.
Fair enough. I understand that, and I had a question about crypto. So thanks for giving your viewpoints on it as well. I wanted to know, right? So we talked about you investing in one of the companies. What would you say are some of the other key factors that helped to fuel that growth to 1 million? Of course, we know that you invested, you maxed out your ISAs. Is there any other key factors as well?
Well, at the end of the day, obviously investing in companies that are more successful, more profits than more winners than losers, put it that way. And the other thing is that the other area where I've been very lucky is that I've been on the receiving end as an investor in about 60 or more than 60 now takeovers or take privates. This is where a larger company takes over a smaller company. Now, I've tended to invest in smaller quoted companies rather than larger ones, and the whole the whole corporate life journey post-war, post the Second World War, has been larger companies taking over smaller companies for a mix of reasons, or people who built up small public companies, family businesses, deciding to sell them, and maybe retire to Monte Carlo or buy a farm or whatever, as it were. Yeah. So I've been on the receiving end of, as I said, 60 or so takeovers or take privates. And so normally when one large company takes over a smaller one, normally it pays a premium over and above the market price, the prevailing market price, to get the selling shareholders to agree, as it were.
Right, okay, I understand.
And at the moment, the average takeover premium currently is around 45%.
Right.
Now, when as an example, when Aviva, the big insurance company, took over Direct Line, they paid something like a 70% premium to Direct Line shareholders to tempt them to sell out to Aviva. And so Aviva now own Direct Line. So if you're on the receiving end of takeover bids over the years, then that obviously helps to build up the value of your overall portfolio.
Okay.
And so if a takeover comes in, if I'd have been a shareholder in Direct Line, then Aviva come in and buy me out. So I've got cash to reinvest. And so I then try and find another investment to invest in, to buy into.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you decided to invest in smaller companies, because a lot of people would say that seems a bit riskier.
Well, I would qualify. The companies that I invest in are smallish relative to large big companies like Tesco or Greggs or AstraZeneca or BA Systems or sort of big companies like that. But they're not startup companies. In other words, I don't invest in startup businesses. I don't also invest in I only invest, by the way, in UK companies.
Okay, yeah,
because I can get to know them a little bit better. So I invest in UK companies. I don't invest in exploration companies, in other words, mining companies or oil prospecting companies.
Yeah.
I don't invest in contracting businesses now, because they always hit bad contracts at some stage. And I don't invest in biotech stocks, not because you can't do very well if you invest in the successful biotech companies, but it requires specialist knowledge to invest in, say, biotech companies or in mining companies. And I've not got that specialist knowledge, so therefore I tend to keep clear of those areas. So I'm investing in already established businesses, which are ideally profitable, which have an established market position, which I think are growing, and which aren't too heavily in debt. And so one's looking for companies that tick a number of boxes. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm trying to eliminate the risk. And what an investor is trying to do is to avoid the losses. Do you understand me? To avoid the losses. That's the key to a successful investment. Is to avoid the losses.
Okay, I understand.
Because everyone will have some winners, but there'll be some losers as well. So you've got to try and minimize the losers. That's basically the approach. What one is trying to do.
Okay, I understand.
Easier said than done, I have to say.
Definitely. So it sounds like you were targeting smaller companies, not startups, but companies that were generating a revenue and profit, because you were talking about dividends
and paying a dividend.
So you're definitely targeting like smaller companies, clearly growing and clearly where they are generating profit, where you can reuse the dividends.
And the smaller companies, of course, have the opportunity of growing at a much faster rate than larger companies. You know, I mean, I come back, say, to Tesco for the sake of argument. Now, over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years, Tesco, you'll probably see Tesco growing, but inevitably, probably at a lower rate than in their first 10 years, because of course now pretty well every area has got 2 or 3 supermarkets. There aren't areas where, or there aren't many areas where there aren't any supermarkets. So their ability to grow from an already large size is clearly going to be restricted. Yeah. Whereas if you'd bought, say, into Tesco when they started, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, whenever it was, at that stage, supermarkets were in their infancy, and there was great opportunity for that smaller company, Tesco, then to grow.
Okay. That makes sense. And I understand. And I definitely want to delve more into that because I think it's very interesting. So I just wanted to, again, just hammer the home, right, for people to understand in terms of starting small. So I think you roughly said that you think that you started, in terms of the PEP, it was roughly £2,000 in the first year?
The first year was I think, about £2,000.
Okay,
yes.
so you 2,000, and I guess...
And of course, that £2,000 was something that I probably saved over a few years. Okay. I didn't necessarily, I can't remember it because we're going back, many years now. So it was money that I saved that I put in. It wasn't that, I saved it from I could just put it on one side from a pay packet, as it were, but it was money that I'd saved
previously.
That went into it. Although it's difficult to remember now because we're talking... what are we talking? 45 years, maybe, something like that.
That's interesting. No, but it's good to know, right? Because again, yes, I know it's 1987, which is £2,000 was worth a lot more back then, but still, the fact that you saved that, then you put that into the market. Did you put that as a lump sum, or was it like, were you dripping?
No, that went in as a lump sum. I'm pretty sure.
That went into a lump sum. Okay, that's interesting. No, thanks for explaining that. And then obviously over that time, like I was saying, it was 126,000. Roughly, that equated to about 7,877, which roughly equated to about 757 per month. So again, I just want to hammer that home to people so they understand that small, putting in a little amount, drip feeding a little amount of what you can is still a good way to, build your wealth as well. So, you talked about one of your investments. Are you able to share, highlight any of your other best performing investments?
Best performing investments,
and what kind of returns they kind of brought in.
Well, there've been a number of great successes over the years. Companies that have that have grown, and as I said, many that have been taken over. Yeah. But coming to the present day. This is an example of one that's been very successful, and I wish they were all as successful. But there is a company called Cerillion, Cerillion, which was drawn to my attention when it first became public. That was in 2016, and I met the controlling shareholder and the chief executive, a man called Louis Hall, who'd led the buyout of Cerillion from Logica. It was originally part of Logica. Yeah. And he led the buyout of it. And then Cerillion grew itself and then went public. And I met him, and I liked the story. And I thought the shares were somewhat undervalued. There was a very nice dividend yield, and in the growing telecom sector, I thought the valuation was attractive. Yeah. But I didn't get any shares initially on what's known as the placing. I was a little bit late, but I bought in the first week of dealings, the first time you could buy shares. This is in 2016. And I paid, I think, 87p for those shares, 87p, and made a modest investment. And then I bought some more, I think at just over 100p. from memory, 2016. So and those shares have grown at peak from 80 odd p to £19.
Wow. Oh my God.
Now they've drifted back to about £17 now.
Wow.
But still, it's huge growth. So it's been very successful. And this is a company, Cerillion is a company that still, I think, has got a deal of growth ahead of it. They provide what's known as billing services and similar for the world's telecom companies.
Yeah.
So it enables, an individual telecom company to actually bill and get paid by those who use its services. And it still only has 1 or 2% of the world market. And they believe their software is very attractive, and they believe, and I think hope they're right, that there's still a long way to go in the growth of that business. But it's quite highly valued now, and there's no certainty.
Yeah.
If you invest in a business, even if you check it this way, you check it that way, and make sure it ticks all the boxes, and you think it's a great business, all of a sudden something can come along, a totally unexpected event, and something that like a left field event that's totally unforeseen. Yeah. So if you're running a retail business, for the sake of argument, a shop, and COVID comes along,
you can do.
It was bad news.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the companies that manufactured PPE, protective clothing, or medical products, during that period did quite well. And of course, COVID was a period when Amazon did particularly well. When one could buy online, because in part you couldn't go to shops. So there is always an element of risk in investing in the stock market, and you can't get away from that, but you can minimize the risk. So if you don't want to take any risks at all, well, put the money under the bed, or buy premium bonds, for the sake of argument, because you put out £100 of premium bonds, you'd always get £100 out, and hopefully have one or two winnings en route. But just leaving the cash in the bank isn't very clever, really, because of course with inflation the buying power goes down.
Thanks for that. That is an amazing return. I think if my calculations are correct, you said 80p to about £19, even £17. That is more than 10x. So that's
nearly a 20 bagger. But I mean, that's exceptional. You asked me best for one that's done particularly well, and I wish all had done that, because if all had done well, I think we might be having this talk and interview in Monte Carlo rather than in.
Okay, so I want to delve a little bit into it and just highlight to people as well, right? So over those 16 years, right, your average annual return was 21%, which is amazing. That's double the S&P 500. That's beating the market. Again, the conventional wisdom is that most investors don't beat the market. It's not standard to. But not only did you beat it on a consistent basis, which is it's a very difficult thing to do, right? I guess, what was like the approach that helped you consistently, achieve those above average returns?
Well, I mean, you're just looking at the overall figures, understandably, and saying, well, that's X% each year.
Yeah, roughly on average.
Right, on average. Yeah. But of course, there'll be some years, lean years, difficult years, where I was an investor. I remember in the early 1970s, before PEPs and ISAs came out, when we had something called the secondary banking crisis, and some of the smaller banks crashed, and some of the big house builders crashed, some of the property companies crashed, And there were even rumours about NatWest Bank as to whether how strong, how viable that was. And the stock market fell to a level where virtually no one was buying. No one was buying, and shares were yielding. A dividend yield is a dividend that the companies pay each year. The dividend yields were very substantial because the price of the shares had fallen, but no one was buying.
Yeah.
And so those situations can come along, and I've seen 2 or 3 periods where there've been big falls in the market. And so when you invest in the stock market, you have to, in my judgment, make sure you're not doing it on borrowed money. You're doing it on your own savings, so you can afford to be patient, hopefully for the market and prices to recover. But if you borrow money to invest and prices fall, then you're in big trouble because the bank who lent you the money, they want their money back, as it were. So, in my judgment, people should never borrow to invest in the stock market.
I understand,
and always make sure that you keep back a certain amount of money for what I term, the heart bypass or something unexpected that you have to pay for. The boiler blows up and you've got to replace the boiler. So you don't want to put every penny into the stock market. You must keep some cash back as a reserve, and then what's left. Then maybe invest, but invest in a conservative way, conservative small c.
Appreciate you sharing that, the fact that, like you say, I know I said average, appreciate you mentioning that some years there would have been losses, which is understandable, because I think people do need to understand that one year might be a loss. So actually, if another year was 100%, maybe the average is 50. I know that's not completely correct maths, but that's how it kind of works. There's got to be some
lose money. I remember I bought some shares years ago in HMV, who had the record shops, as it were, and then the sales of vinyl records disappeared. And poor old HMV really pretty well went out of business and then changed hands 2 or 3 times. Now there's been a resurgence, I believe, in vinyl records. But fashions change, people's interests change, and as I said before, new industries come along and old industries disappear. I remember in my early years, you could buy shares in any number of steel manufacturing companies. Now, I don't think there's a steel company, steel manufacturing business you can invest in. Similarly, originally we had a number of UK car manufacturing companies. You could buy shares in British Motors and in Leyland and Jaguar. I mean, these are all separate public companies. And now, of course, pretty well all the car manufacturing is done through and by really big global manufacturing companies.
Appreciate that. So going back to the investment approach that helped you get that average return, I guess what was that investment strategy or approach that helped you achieve like that average return? And I guess, how did you find the right investments? Because although yes, you had some losses, for you to build that portfolio to 1 million, you definitely found
had more successes than
losses.
Than losses. That's right. So it was by adopting a conservative approach, only buying into established businesses which I thought would grow, and then those companies, by and large, paid a dividend each year to shareholders, and I reinvested that. And then there were the takeovers as well, which also gave you a premium, as it were, on a prevailing price. So the way I would describe it is that I built up my ISA and my non-ISA portfolios brick by brick over the years. And some years have been more successful than others, and in some years one's overall lost money. So it's not been a straight line. And the objective is obviously to try and make more successful investments than unsuccessful ones.
Yeah.
And try and avoid the losses. And so I draw a parallel between the stock market and golf, for example. That in golf you might be having a really good round, and then all of a sudden on the 17th hole or the 18th hole you hit the ball into the river or into the wood.
Yeah.
And so your overall card, your overall result is ruined by that one shot, as it were. So the key is to try and avoid the losses and minimize your mistakes.
Yeah.
And you only do that by investing over a period. And we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
We all get things wrong.
Yeah. So it's investing in smaller companies that. Did all of them have to produce dividends? Did you care?
That's a key factor as far as I'm concerned.
You had to
that they're established, they're profitable, they're paying dividends, they don't have too much debt.
Okay.
And also, very important, that the people running the business have a big stake in that business, a lot of shares in the business. So, their interests are aligned with outside shareholders who aren't actually in the business.
Do you think that strategy would work today?
Well, all I can say is it has worked for me over the years.
Okay,
and I know no better. But one is learning all the time.
Yes, exactly.
You never stop learning, I now. I mean, if I was say investing in 10 different companies. I would be now, having had a lot of experience over the years. Obviously, I'd be expecting, for the sake of argument, if I invested in 10 stocks now, over a period, I would be disappointed if more than one or worse 2 were real downers. I mean,
wow.
So I would expect if I invested in 10 different companies now.
Yeah.
I would hope that a couple would do really well, or maybe 3 would do really well, 2 or 3 would do moderately well, 2 or 3 might just hold their own, and maybe, hopefully, only 1 or maybe 2 would actually lose money on over a period.
Okay.
I mean, if the overall stock market, or if there was a big global crisis. And every share falls, then in 1 year, almost all your shares on paper would be down. But you've got to be in a position to sit out those difficult periods and wait for a recovery to come. Yeah. And that's why it's important to only do it with your own money and not to do it with borrowed money where you're under pressure to perform.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because it's so important. Actually, now you made me think of a question. Your portfolio, you might not remember the exact numbers, but at any one time, how many kind of companies roughly were you invested in? Was it like 5, 10?
No,
15,
no, it'd be more. It would be more than that.
More than 20?
Yes, at times. Really? I mean, even probably now, I've probably got, I don't know, I've not worked it out exactly. Probably more like 30 or so companies, But the point is that the amount you have in individual ones that will vary substantially.
Yes.
So there might be in that 30, say, there might be 10 or 12 which are really significant holdings, and then some of the others where I'm less sure, less confident, then I'd put less money into them, as it were.
Okay.
So my normal approach is, if I like a company and if I think it's going to be a good investment, I will buy a small number of shares in it and get to know it better, and then maybe buy more and more. So in Cerillion that I mentioned, I probably bought on about 5 occasions. Some of the shares that I've got, I've bought, added to on about 30 occasions.
Okay.
When one really likes the company and knows it and has confidence in it.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot of stocks to manage and keep up to date. But you're really into investing, so I can understand like how that can kind of work. I guess my question is, what made you decide to invest in stocks and not go for like index funds and ETFs? Because that's again conventional wisdom. That's what kind of people do.
Well, first of all, if you're investing in index funds or funds managed by others, you're paying a management fee. By and large, you're paying something. So by doing it myself, I'm avoiding it. But the point is this: that I've always been interested in the businesses themselves and the people who run the business.
Okay.
I enjoy visiting the companies and and going to the annual. I used to go to a lot of annual general meetings. Each public company has to have an annual meeting where shareholders can come and meet the board and ask them questions. And I enjoy seeing businesses in action and meeting the people running the companies. Yeah. And I enjoy that interface, that personal relationship.
Okay.
Which you don't get if you just invest in a large fund.
Okay.
Where someone else is doing it for you. Now, if you have no interest and no knowledge and aren't prepared to invest any time in doing any sort of research, then by all means let someone else manage the money for you, as it were. Go into index funds or unit trusts or investment trusts or whatever they are. But I try to encourage, I'm an evangelist to try and encourage more people to take their own decisions, because it's not difficult.
Yeah.
And I come back to what I said at the start. You need common sense and patience. Yeah. You don't need to be a mathematical whiz kid or anything like that.
And I appreciate you saying that, because if you're saying those are the two things, and that's what's worked for you, and it's worked for you over a sustained period, it shows that it is definitely doable. So talking about patience, I want to know, because you were patient over 16 years. You managed to achieve something really incredible. How did you stay patient during those times? You weathered several storms. There was a .com crash that happened early 2000s as well that you weathered. But yet interesting thing is, when you declared you were ISA Millionaire was after that .com happened. Sure. So how did you stay patient throughout?
Well, you've got to keep your nerve, and you've got to. I think to be a successful investor, you've got to be reasonably optimistic that the world economy will grow, and that the businesses you're investing in will grow. I mean, if you take an opposite view, if you think that the end of the world is coming, the Armageddon is about to happen, then I'm not sure what you do. You hide under the bed, maybe with a crate of whiskey and a bar of gold, and go under the bed. Or if you follow some of these extreme religious sects, you go to the top of a mountain, waiting for the world to implode or explode. And of course, nothing happens. So you have to rather sheepishly come down from the mountain. My point is that you've got to work on the basis that, by and large, the world will become more prosperous, that more people will require, better healthcare and better, more natural foods, and they will travel more. And they'll be able to afford mobile phones and iPads and similar. If you believe, as I say, that nuclear war is round the corner or the end of the world is nigh, then, as I say, I don't know what you do. Maybe hide under the bed. I don't know. So you have to take an optimistic view.
Okay, so be optimistic,
without being stupid optimistic.
Yeah. And you feel like that optimism helped you to be patient.
Yes, well, it has to. Yes, you know that after the darkness there is the dawn, as it were. And we've had a number of, as you mentioned, a number of times where the stock market overall has crashed. We had this, what I mentioned, the secondary banking crisis, when some of the smaller banks crashed in the 1970s. we had the subprime crash when a lot of this all stemmed from America, where a lot of the loans that had been made on housing, the loans were defaulted. And then we had COVID that came along. So, these events can come along.
Yeah. And I guess from my point of view as well, obviously you got to that point. Was there a temptation to, your portfolio got to $1 million? For a lot of people, they might be like, okay, I'm out. Was there a temptation to cash out and say, okay, I've hit this, I'm finished? Or did you kind of decide, okay, I'm going to continue investing?
Well, I personally did.
Yeah.
But others may take a different view, and some people may build up to a certain level, and because they they want to go on a world cruise, or they want to sell up and they want to buy a flat in Spain or whatever it is. So the beauty of investing is that it's your money, you own the shares, and you can sell them at any time to do whatever you want with the money.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if you're selling them, you want to ideally to sell when the price is high rather than low. But nevertheless, there's almost always a market, almost always a buyer who will pay a certain price.
Okay, so you decided to stay invested,
and I've been investor long term. Yes.
Okay,
and I believe you create financial independence by building up brick by brick.
Yeah. Okay. So also reaching that, there's an element of, I've had conversations on the podcast about, people building their portfolios to 100,000 and then thinking, you know what, I don't know if I can stomach the risk anymore, because of course, losing 10% or losing 5% at 100,000 is a lot bigger than losing that at like £100. If you're losing 5%, £100, £5. If you lose it at 100,000, it's 5,000. If you lose it at $1 million, it's 50,000. So for a lot of people, they might not be able to stomach that. Did your strategy change when you got to that, or was it like,
I don't think it changed at all. But obviously, if at the end of the day, your portfolio does increase in value because the underlying holdings have increased in value, you always have the option of saying, well, actually, this has all gone very, very well, but I'm going to, be conservative and take some money out of the stock market and sell a proportion of my holdings and put the money, into premium bonds or buy a little cottage or whatever you're particularly tempted by.
Yeah.
You always have that option. You can always sell the shares. There's almost always a market for these for the shares.
Yeah.
So you just got to be sensible, basically, and not have all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah. Well, how are you so how are you so assured and calm in this situation? Because to say even at $1 million portfolio,
I'm not calm. I'm just worn out. That's what.
Okay. So at that point, it was just like you're almost like it's more logical than emotional.
Oh, yes.
At that point, it's like no longer emotion.
Yeah.
It's numbers. It's going to bounce back. So it's not.
So it comes back to what I said earlier. The two most important things: common sense and patience.
Okay, I understand. Okay, I understand now. I think the common sense is starting to evolve into a lot of other stuff, right?
Sure.
So that common sense could be like, actually, no, we know that this business is doing well. Doesn't matter if it's down today. We know it's probably going to go up, right? So that's an element of common sense. Sure. Okay, sure. Gosh. So you did mention that you say that you did learn a few things. You mentioned the strategy. In 2025 has that strategy changed? Your investing strategy?
No,
changed,
I don't think the strategy has changed. But what I have moved towards in my ISA is a mix now of big high-yielding stocks, big companies that pay a big dividend, historically a very high dividend, and balance that with smaller quoted companies that pay a lower dividend. So overall, I'm still getting quite a good income from my ISA, which at the moment I'm reinvesting.
Okay, you're still reinvesting.
So I'm not. I'm reinvesting the dividends on the holdings.
Okay,
I'm not putting in now new money each year.
That's okay.
So
you stopped.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. So the dividend yields that you get from companies like M&G, the fund manager, who shares yield nearly 10%.
Wow.
Legal and General shares, the big insurance company, yield 9%. In other words, if you bought £100 worth of Legal and General shares today, you get a dividend of about £9 a year. So these are very big, safe companies, very attractive dividend yields in a historic context. Very attractive.
Okay. No, thanks for and it's so interesting. So no longer required to invest because the income from the investment is like
correct,
not just self-preserving, self-growing.
Correct.
Interesting. That is so interesting. So it no longer needs you to put money in. To put money. Yeah. So you're not interested in like using it for income or anything like that?
Well, I think because I have a smaller portfolio that is outside the ISA, and so I take the income from the smaller one.
Right.
But of course, in the ISA, you're taking advantage of the free of tax situation.
Okay.
And so any money within the ISA, you don't want to take out if you can possibly avoid it.
Yeah.
Because it's really valuable as a tax-free investment.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you mentioned obviously that you're looking at M&G. That's something that you're
I'm invested in M&G, fund manager who shares yielding 9 or 10%.
Yeah.
Legal and General also the shares yielding about 9%. In other words, for every £100 you put in, but if I bought £100 worth of Legal and General shares tomorrow, I would during the year get a dividend of about £9, say.
Yeah.
Which for a company of that size and stature is excellent. Good. And so these are historically very high yields, and it's a great opportunity.
Okay. And you're not interested in like the big tech companies like your Googles, your Amazon, your Microsoft?
Well, when you say I'm not interested,
I'm asking.
I mean, not interested. You can't follow every stock.
Yes.
And also I enjoy the relationship with the companies and the company boards. So that would tend to drive me towards continuing with UK companies.
Okay. I understand that
rather than big global businesses, which I probably would have done very well financially had I invested years ago in Microsoft or Apple or similar. But I didn't, and so I've been very happy to plod on in my own way. Really,
yeah. To be fair, you've done extremely well. I don't think you need to be worried about like investing those. What you've done in your portfolio is amazing. So right now, as I mentioned, AI, big tech, that's kind of dominating in terms of from like an investment performance at the moment, right? So I want to kind of get your view on this, like looking ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, it might be things that you're also looking at areas. Is there any like sectors that you kind of see that's kind of emerging and potentially could be like a top performer in the future?
Well, I suppose you could say that at some stage, space exploration will be become an established sector for the sake of argument. But I wouldn't be investing now in space because it's an industry sector very much in its infancy, and could be quite risky. But let's say in 10 years' time, if there's a company established that was taking passengers to the moon, every other day. And was doing this successfully and profitably, well, I might consider investing in it, as it were. I don't think there's any way that I'd go up to the moon myself, I have to say. But
cool.
If that's what people want to do, that's what people want to do.
Interesting. Okay, so space exploration is...
Well, I mean, that's a fairly obvious growth. The world of UAVs, drones, in simple terms. Now, drones now, as we've seen from the conflict in particularly Ukraine and Russia, and we saw it before when the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis fought. Drones, unmanned vehicles carrying munitions, clearly is the way ahead. Not completely, but very substantially now. So, firms that manufacture, there was an Australian firm, or is, that manufactures drones, and that's its main business. I think the shares have done very well indeed.
Okay.
So, at the moment, defence stocks, obviously, because of increased defence expenditure, because of Ukraine and threat from Russia, build-up of China, that is obviously a fairly booming sector at the moment.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, cool. So, for someone listening that has the dreams of building a multi-million pound investment portfolio, and I know there's a few people because I've seen the comments on the YouTube channel, what steps should they start taking today to make that a reality for them?
Well, they've got to decide, I think, are they going to take a bit of an interest in it themselves? And if they're not, then, buy a tracker fund or some sort of index fund or similar, and let others manage it. And, you will only have an idea of what they're investing in. And of course, you're paying them a certain annual fee to do it. But I would encourage people to back their own judgment and their own common sense, and read, in the city sections of the papers, or if they think, a particular public company. The public company meaning one that shares are quoted on the stock market. You can look it up on the web and read about it, and you can get all the information on it. How many shares the directors have, what the last annual report looked like, what was the latest comment from the company, had they just announced a new series of contracts for the sake of argument. Are they expanding, like a company like Hollywood Bowl? Have they just opened 2 or 3 new bowling centres, for example? Does it look as though it's a growing business? So you start to do some research yourself, and of course, every company now, public company, will have a website. Look at that. You can go to the annual general meeting if you buy a few shares in it, get to know the business. If you like it, you buy more shares.
Yeah. Okay. So you're a fan of investing in individual stocks?
Hugely, because I think if you get it right, it can be more successful than a fund.
Okay. And
it can be much more enjoyable and interesting.
Okay.
But each to their own.
Yeah, each to their own. I do agree. I think we just don't talk enough about investing in individual stocks. And to be fair, on the podcast, I shy away from talking about it because I know that there's an element of risk. I know that many people struggle to beat the market. But the fact that, I have you here and I'm able to speak to you about how you've done it, and the fact that you said it's been, you've figured out an approach for yourself that's worked and you've managed to do it consistently over time, shows that actually maybe if you, like you say, if you have common sense and you're patient, you can kind of do that, right, as well. I think that's quite important.
Sure.
So, as we mentioned before, right, 4,000. We have 4,850 ISA millionaires in the UK, which is that. I think that's very low. It's a very small percentage,
sure.
Right? Why do you think such few people reach that milestone in their stocks and shares ISA? Despite
I think
years?
One of the reasons is financial education is very, very poor in schools. It's abysmal. A lot of people don't know much about the stock market or how to go about it, and think it's high risk or gambling, which is not. If you're buying into established, solid businesses, they can go down, but you're unlikely to lose all your money. But that is investing. It's not speculating as people do with cryptocurrencies. But I think also television has been a great failure because it's failed over the years to cover the stock market or investment opportunities, and there are so many great British companies to invest in out there, and the stock market doesn't produce any programs that covers those opportunities, and I think it's a great pity. I think it's a national loss.
Yeah, that's what you were saying on our way here, and you're just saying that it's been a big loss, right? And it's had such a big impact. So then I guess on that, why is it important for people to start investing? How can we kind of get that number 8 from 4,800 to 50,000?
Well, you've got to start when people are young, try and educate them in the schools as to what a bank is, what a dividend is, what the stock market is, and how you can go about it. There's nothing too small to start investing. You don't need a large sum of money, and you buy a small quantity initially. When I started off, I was just putting £80 into a company or £100, small amounts. In some cases, £50 because that's all I could afford in those days. Now, obviously, we're talking about larger sums of money. But I'm coming clearly to the end of certainly my investment life anyway, who knows? I'm too young to change the approach that I've tried to share with you today.
And why do you think it's important for people that are listening today, watching this today, for them to, if they haven't started investing, I hope, I'm looking at you, if you haven't started investing, why should they start investing?
Well, it's enjoyable. It can be very profitable. And indirectly, you're owning shares in UK companies who are making profits and paying taxes to support the public services here, and you're supporting good UK companies, who provide employment and create wealth for the country.
Yeah. Amazing. And I think that's very important. I like the fact that you said UK. I need to start looking more at UK companies. I think because there's the allure of the US, you've got the tech and stuff like that. It can be quite interesting.
I mean, to be honest, I'm sure if I'd invested 10 years ago entirely in America rather than in this country, I'd have probably made more money.
Okay.
But the way I've done it here is, in my judgment, much more enjoyable.
Okay, fair. So it's worked for you, and you've had a good outcome out of it.
Sure.
I guess in your 60 years of investing, that's a substantial amount. What are some of the key insights and lessons that you've gained from that time?
Well, I come back to what I said earlier, without wishing to repeat and be boring, as it were. Invest in good growing companies that are profitable, paying dividends, where the people running them have good share stakes in the business, and be patient. You don't rush to take a profit. Stay with it, and your investment hopefully will grow while the business grows.
Thanks so much, John. I think this has been a great conversation because it's really helped people to understand, the fact that you can start this slowly. It's not as difficult as it needs to be. It's not as complicated as it needs to be. Right. And I think
you don't need to be a brilliant mathematician. You don't need to have a huge amount of money. Don't think that, you need to be a Nobel Prize winner to do it. It's for your average person, like me, to build up the knowledge of investing, and it's in the national interest to do so as well.
And do you think anybody is this possible for anybody to potentially be able to get to that £1 million portfolio? Because a lot of people listening to this, that is a goal.
Well, it's possible over a period. Certainly over. It can be done. But there's no shortcut. They've got to build their portfolios up brick by brick, really.
Okay. Amazing. So I wanted to talk about your books, right? So you've very kindly gifted me one. So I haven't got the other one here, but the first one that I mentioned, How to Make a Million Slowly, and First Taste of Stock Market Investment, which is designed to make
the How to Make a Million Slowly, which I think I published in 2013 with the Financial Times. That really, I covered a lot of my former Financial Times articles and looked back on them, as it were. But the book that I just did a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, called Yummy Yogurt.
Yeah.
It is only a very small book, only 30 odd pages, really for the novice investor or the bright teenager. Anyone who's prepared to just devote a couple of hours of their time reading that book, in my judgment, will, for the first time, really understand the basics of stock market investment.
Yeah.
I've tried to explain it in a very, very, very simple way, told through a story.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's been very well reviewed on Amazon. I think most people have enjoyed it and benefited, but of course not everyone, but most.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what we need with investing. I think the whole thing about it is that a lot of people are concerned and scared about investing for a number of reasons. One, scared that they're going to lose money. Worried in terms of, it's too complicated,
sure.
Not patient. There's a myriad of reasons, but I think it's such a great wealth building tool, which is why I always try to advocate for it on the podcast, because it's such an accessible way for you to build wealth. It's not something like where you start a business where you need some sort of a specialist skill, or you're having to work really hard in your career to go up the ladder. Right?
No, stock market is really what you do, how you handle your savings.
Exactly.
That's what it's about. Basically.
Exactly. So that's why I'm a big advocate of it, and I really appreciate you sharing your journey, sharing the fact that it is possible to do this and build it to £1 million portfolio. Because again, a lot of people won't share this and say that this is possible. When we were on the way here, you said that you actually wanted to share that in 2003 so that people understood it was possible. Yes,
I mean, I like to regard myself as if I to use one word, I like to consider myself an evangelist for the private investor, and to encourage people to invest directly in companies, apply their own judgment, not rely on other people, as it were. Yeah. And I think that way, hopefully, they'll develop not only the interest and have the pleasure that I've had over the years, but also build up successful portfolios, which, will stand them in good stead when they, when they approach old age and possibly have got to go into a care home, and we know what the fees there are like, or to help, with grandchildren in some shape or form, and hopefully, to leave some money at the end of it all to, to your children or children's children.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. So where can people find you if they, they want to, reach out or anything?
Well, I write now pretty well a monthly column for the Daily Telegraph. I do a monthly podcast with the Investors Chronicle that goes under the Lee and the IC. Yeah. And if you go Lee and the IC and put in by Google or something like that, then the monthly podcast we've done come along, or they can listen to, the sort of podcast that people like you and I have done today. Yeah. So there are ways, but I'm not qualified, although I've had a huge amount of experience and like to think I'm effectively qualified to talk. I'm not qualified in a regulatory or statutory sense, as it were, so I can't give out advice. Yeah. And I'm not there to. I'm not allowed to because I've not passed any exams or similar. Okay. I'm not allowed to recommend any particular stock to individuals. I can talk generally, and if people like the sort of companies I'm writing about or mentioning, then fine. And if they don't, as it were. But I'm not a direct beneficiary of what they decide to do.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm just telling my story.
Yeah, thank you, and we appreciate it. That's what we need. We need more people sharing their story, so we know it's possible. Again, like I said, John, it's been great having you on the podcast. Do you have any final words of wisdom for the watchers and listeners?
No, all I would say is that if people listening have half the pleasure and fun and interest that I've had from my 60 years of investing, I think they'll have a happy time and hopefully will be financially successful as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate you featuring on the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you next week's episode.